Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Hell's Tavern, RGV. We have today author of Capitalism Killed the Middle Class, 25 Ways the System is Rigged Against You, available on paperback on Amazon, as well as Kindle, hardcover, and paperback. Dan Mccrory, how you doing, sir?
Great, how are you, Earl?
I'm doing good. Thank you for joining us today.
I'm glad to be here. We're going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects, my book.
Yeah. Of course. And we have a lot to get into. So let's hit the ground running here.
Very good.
One of my major concerns is the political climate that we are facing here in our country today. The divisions between left and right, and the fact that so much is going on, and all people seem to see is the culture war, right? But that is by design. I saw Ted Cruz on the Senate floor railing against Big Bird.
Oh yeah,
because Big Bird was pushing for the COVID vaccinations, right? And he wasn't really pushing it. He was just saying that how he had gotten it and this and that. But that was enough to get Ted Cruz on the Senate floor and railing against, because he knows he's going to score political points by that. But that's the climate that we are in today here in this country. And the kind of the chaos that we are living in today didn't start in a vacuum. It didn't start with Trump. It started, in your opinion, in the 80s.
Yeah.
With Ronald Reagan and a sort of a war against the working class.
Well, even before that, in 1971, this lawyer named Lewis C. Powell, had a friend who was one of the bigwigs in the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And he says, we're getting tired of these Vietnam vets and these lefties blaming us for the Vietnam War. Just because we're making money off it doesn't mean that we started it. And we want to take away the conversation from them so people aren't listening to them. And can you help us? And Powell, who up to that point, his claim of fame was he went before the Supreme Court to argue that cigarettes were not addicting. So already staying on less than firm ground. So he said, sure, let me whip something up. So he wrote up 19 pages and he said, here's what you got to do. If you can't commit to this, then your fight is lost. And what it said was, you take over the schools, you argue about all the things that they're being taught. You create think tanks, like this one called ALEC. I don't know if you've heard of that. No. ALEC is the American Legislative Exchange Council. What they'll do is they'll go in to a state and talk to one of their favorite legislators and say, we want this law passed. Here's the template. You just put your name on it and we're good to go. And then he'll gather his friends and they'll vote something into law in that particular state. And they'll keep on doing that in other states until it becomes a federal law, at which point all their conservative business folks are happy. And that's how this whole thing started, was them deciding to invest wholly in this Powell memo or Powell Manifesto, whatever you want to call it. Okay. And it's worked very successfully for the banks and these conservative businesses over the years. I had a handyman come into my house a couple of weeks ago. The first thing out of his mouth was, these unions have ruined business in this country. And who else would he be talking for except the banks and the big corporations?
Right.
So it just amazed me that he would take that tactic. And so what I've done is I've created the Mccrory Manifesto and say, we need to take back that conversation. We need to take the words big business out and put in the people and unions and take out capitalism and put in something else that might work, like democratic socialism. It works for Sweden and Finland and Denmark and all those. So that should be in there. So this manifesto has worked well for the business class over the last 40 years. And we need to basically steal it from them, because that would do it. But along came Reagan, And first of all, this was under Nixon that this was done in 1971. Nixon was so impressed, he appointed Lewis Powell to the Supreme Court himself. So he got to rule on a lot of issues down the line that may have turned out differently if he hadn't been on the court. Reagan was so impressed, he created copies of this memo for his whole cabinet to use and to live by. And even Trump used it. So it's held,
Interesting.
it's held up over time. And like I said, it talks about grabbing different parts of the society, psyche out there, and doing something about it. And Reagan went on to do a lot of other things that I could rant and rave about for a couple of hours, but I know we don't have that kind of time.
So before we start talking about when the working class started getting exploited, when was a time where the working class was flourishing in this country?
Post World War II, we had the highest income tax on business. They weren't complaining, and we had the highest success rate. One parent could stay home with the kids, and the other parent could work a full-time job, and that paid for sending the kids to college. It paid for food on the table, a house to live in, all the things that we call the American dream. And we've gotten away from that. Now you have to both parents have to work 2 or 3 jobs to make the kind of money to where you can actually live. And there's something wrong with that equation. That's why I said capitalism killed the middle class.
So okay, so if you're saying that post World War II was the moment for the working class when the middle class and the working class were flourishing in this country, how much of that was due to the fact that the entire rest of the world was basically destroyed, and the American manufacturing base was the go-to base for the global community?
Yeah, there's very much merit to what you're saying there, because you're right. Japan was flat on its back, and in fact, for quite a few years after that, anything that came from Japan was looked at as junk. And obviously, Germany wasn't looking too good either. But a friend of mine, a Hungarian gentleman, was on a fishing trip with. There was a German guy in the boat and a Japanese guy, and they were laughing, saying that they won the war because we are out there being the world's police, and they were allowed to go into manufacturing and doing all sorts of things because they didn't have to prop up a military. So that's from their point of view, they won the war.
Right, because they had the resources to be able to invest in other things other than the military.
Exactly.
Okay, so income, the 40s and the 50s, and the 50s is usually viewed as the moment for the middle class and the working class, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so around what time did that start to change, and what policies were supported by who, and this is your moment.
FDR created the New Deal, and he created the National Labor Relations Board, and that put us working people on a level playing field with business at the time. But it wasn't until 2 years later, after he died and after the war, 1947, that they came up with the Wagner Act. And the Wagner Act included in it right to work. The right to work said that you didn't have to belong to a union, that you don't have to pay dues.
Right.
And so that dried up a lot of money that unions could use to organize and to negotiate and to fight grievances on the shop floor. So that pretty much ruined whatever we had as far as a level playing field with business. They've been looking for their chance to get back, and that was it.
And as history has it, Eleanor Roosevelt was fighting tooth and nail after her husband's death to stop the Wagner Act.
Yes, you got it. She went to her demise, a very broken and disappointed woman.
Yeah, and that's because power was taken away from the laborer.
Yes, because she's the one that introduced FDR to the whole concept of the labor movement, and she was the one that convinced him that this was a worthy cause. And he wasn't too big on the guys with the cigars in the back room. He was more
Right.
about the working individual. So he did a lot for us, and we need to get back to those days. That's why a lot of people liked Bernie Sanders, because he talked the way that FDR did.
And okay, so and then at what point did the train start to get off, go off the rails?
I think, well, Reagan, it's too bad because Reagan showed such promise when he was the head of the Screen Actors Guild, but he got on this kick about anti-communism. So he was going to fight the big bad bear of communism, and so he got elected on that. He before he did that, he kind of laid waste to mental hospitals here in California. He actually said, "We don't need those," and he closed them all up, and all these people were suddenly out on the streets. All these, and that's where a lot of the homeless first came from, were these poor mental patients that were released and had nowhere to go. So that started, and then when he became president, he decided he would try something called what was then called the Maquiladora Experiment. There were these plants on the other side of the Rio Grande in Mexico that a lot of big businesses like Zenith and other companies who decided to go over there and put their manufacturing base in Mexico. And that was the start of what we later came to know as NAFTA,
NAFTA.
because it was called an experiment, but it was the great transition to what later became NAFTA. And NAFTA came about because Bill Clinton, he was a very successful president because he came in, he's from a right to work state, Arkansas, and he stole the Republican agenda. They couldn't very well fight him on a lot of things because it was from their own playbook,
Right.
including NAFTA.
So okay, so then around the 80s that we started seeing, the good paying jobs start to globalize and start to shift out of America.
Exactly. Yeah, it was the time when economists point to that say that's when wages flatlined, because all of a sudden that money wasn't worth what it had been before. A while back before that, they got rid of the gold standard. So you might point, most economists would probably point at that as the beginning of the end. But as far as working people, it was when the maquiladoras were open for business for Americans.
If you listen to somebody like let's say like a Sean Hannity, uh, he will point to the Reagan era as one of the shining moments for the American worker, as far as the unemployment levels. He saved America from the disaster that was Jimmy Carter. The longest time, peacetime, prosperity. This is the way they speak about Ronald Reagan. I was a huge fan of. I was propagandized a lot when I was successfully propagandized a lot when I was in college, because I would listen to people like Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity, Glenn Beck, right? And now that I look back, I notice that I would make what I call now the arguments of the oligarchs.
I,
Is the every argument I was making only benefit one class, and that's the rich, right?
you got it, my
He,
brother.
and I justified it in many different ways. Freedom, right? That's the big one. Freedom,
Yeah, yeah,
right? We need the freedom for for the working class to be able to get screwed by the rich. That's called freedom.
exactly.
I mean, that's what they call it, freedom, right? Or move. I mean, just to mention real quick, we'll get to it, but the arguments that I used to make was the reason for the 2008 financial collapse was because people made stupid decisions. They got into mortgages that they couldn't afford.
There was some of that also, but
There was some of that, but
there was a lot of predatory lending that went on too.
there was a lot of it. There was a lot of it. My point
Because
is
it's,
that the arguments I was making was the arguments of the banks.
uh,
It was is the arguments that would let the banks off the hook.
yeah,
As you know, and I don't know how you feel about the Tea Party. We'll get to that, but the Tea Party was born out of the Great Recession and the propaganda that came out that came out after that. But yeah, I mean, if, like I said, if you listen to people like Sean Hannity, whatever they view Reagan as this great American hero for the working class. But if you look at the numbers and if you look at the facts, you start to see that the middle class started dwindling around this time.
yeah. That started when he was actually right before he got elected. The air traffic controllers were saying, "Look, the skies are getting crazy out there, and it's getting dangerous, and there's something that may happen." A lot of plane crashes and things like that. They tried to warn the nation, and Reagan said, "I understand your plight." I saw the letter he wrote to PATCO, which is the air traffic controllers union at the time, and he said, "If you guys help me get elected, I'll help you." And so they went to bat for Reagan. They helped him get elected. And then he turned around and said, "If you don't report to work on Monday, you're all fired." And that's a shot over the bow that everybody in labor went, "Whoa."
Yeah, no
We
friend of
wondered
the
how
work.
far he would go to bend us before he broke us.
Yeah, no friend of the working man, huh?
Not at all.
Okay. So then moving past Reagan, we start to see the assault on the middle class. Let's get into Bill Clinton, and then we can get into NAFTA. What are your think out loud about that era for me if you can?
Um, well, as I say in my book, Bill came in and everybody started singing that song by Fleetwood Mac, something about tomorrow, thinking about tomorrow.
Right.
And I said we should have been thinking about tomorrow because that's when NAFTA came along. And I like how Robert Reich has reinvented himself because he was one of the ones. He was Clinton's Secretary of Labor, and he pushed NAFTA big time. Excuse me. I was doing jury duty right after the vote was taken, and I walked into the jury room, and there was my Congressman Howard Berman, and Howard had carried water for Clinton, and he bent a lot of arms to vote for NAFTA, and I said, "How could you do that, Congressman?" And he said, "Don't worry, it's going to create a lot of jobs." And I said, "I hope you're right," but unfortunately, he was wrong.
Yeah.
700,000 people lost their jobs over in manufacturing over the years following the signing of NAFTA. So, uh, like I said, Clinton stole the agenda of the Republican Party, so they really didn't have anything to bitch about except his wife.
And the
And she was
blowjobs
trying to
heard
get
around
us
the
all
world.
single payer health care.
Yeah.
So,
Um, there was also something that happened under Bill Clinton that doesn't get talked about a lot because it was viewed as a victory, as a bipartisan victory, and it was the repeal of Glass-Steagall.
oh, yes. Yeah, there's always been some kind of attempt. Let's see, refresh my memory. Glass-Steagall is the gold standard, right?
No, Glass-Steagall made it. So Glass-Steagall was implemented during FDR, and it made it illegal for community banks to make investments. So in other
So,
words,
yeah.
there was a separation between investment banks and community banks.
Yeah, and I think that's how credit unions got screwed too in the process.
Right.
Um, yeah, and it's come full circle to tell you the truth. Credit unions are now actually we just passed a law to create a state bank in California. So there's some light at the end of that tunnel finally.
Yeah.
And
And I mentioned Glass-Steagall because I mean, as you can see, we're on a timeline, and I'm trying to get to the crash of 2008.
ah,
And so Glass-Steagall plays a very important role in that situation because
Yeah,
about a decade later, after the repeal of Glass-Steagall, we had the mortgage crisis, and that was because banks were able to you know basically play wild west with people's mortgages, and
insurance, all that. Yes,
that wouldn't have
you're
been
right.
allowed before the repeal of Glass-Steagall.
Actually,
But well,
one of Reagan's kids was involved in the last debacle before that, which was back in the late '70s, and that was the savings and loan crisis.
right.
And a lot of people forget about those, but that was another case where big business got in over their heads, and we, the people, had to bail them out.
Yeah, and you see, and the kind of the insidious thing about this entire conversation is that generally, when you ask the average person, to kind of go back and think about or relive the '80s and '90s, they're generally looked at as good times,
Yeah.
right? Because the effects of these policies weren't hitting home yet.
Well, there's been a couple of years ago, somebody did a survey of how people think the country is doing and what it's really doing financially. And people were saying, "Oh, we're doing pretty good. We're doing okay." And yet the numbers showed that they were way out of whack, and that all the money was going to the rich. So it certainly woke me up, even though I had that sneaking suspicion before that. But
Right.
yeah, it's people's perception is not necessarily what's really going on, and I can blame the media on that, and I can blame our politicians. A friend of mine, a comedian, once said that a politician is somebody who lies to the media and then believes everything he reads in the papers.
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So then, as Bill Clinton is on his way out, we get into the 2000s and enter George W. Bush. What do you make of how 9/11 changed the way Americans view their place in the world, as far as the necessity that we need to be involved in global affairs, not just um, as a passive role, but as an aggressive role.
yeah. What people tend to forget is that wasn't the first time the World Trade Center had been attacked. It
Right, Timothy
happened in
McVeigh.
1980. Yeah. And so, yeah, it happened before, and that should have given us some kind of warning. But for us to be the world's police, I think that role came about during World War II because, for instance, in World War II, England told Australia, of their own people, that you're on your own because you're way down there and below the equator. And the U.S. said, "We've got your back." So they still love the U.S. for that reason. So
And yeah, that's a role that's permeated till today.
exactly. So it's not a new thing, but it's more in the public awareness. And now we don't have a draft anymore. We have a volunteer army, and that has also been a mixed blessing because a volunteer army means you don't have the scrutiny of ma and pa anymore, looking at how many body bags are coming back
Yeah,
because they wanted to be there.
you're
So
right.
it's a sad situation, and the only way that we can possibly move out of that role is if somebody steps up, and nobody's going to step up except maybe China, and we're not going to like that if they do.
Yeah. Yeah, I see. I see the 2000s as the era of mass distraction. So we're starting to get into an era where social media is starting. These companies are starting to lift up, and technology. Everybody's starting. These cell phones are starting. I remember I got my first cell phone when I was around 2004, 2005, You know, I lived my entire life without needing a cell phone.
Exactly.
Then suddenly we get these handheld, phones, and we can't keep off of them. We're so there's so many things culturally that are happening that they each have to be taken into account if we're to do justice to a rendition of how we got to where we're at, right? The divisions. Yeah, but can you pick that up one more time and hold it up for a
Yeah.
couple of seconds? A little bit higher.
There we go.
Right there. Right there.
I wrote this book because I realized that I had lived through a lot of the history that you're talking about, and I wanted to offer a warning to the generations coming behind me that these things, this is where they started, this is where they're at today, this is where they're headed. So I included things like the gig economy, universal basic income, all those kinds of things that everybody's looking at now. AI is going to a lot of us writers say, "Oh, there's no way they can replace us," but there is an AI writing program out there now that you just give it a couple of topics and it'll write out your whole report for you.
I've seen that. I've seen that.
Pretty scary stuff. It's going to affect everybody.
And so I also want to talk about the role of capitalism and crony capitalism, the differences between the two in your mind, if there are any differences, because some will say that capitalism just naturally leads to crony capitalism, and
It certainly looks that way. Yeah.
yeah. And so, but let's continue on this trajectory. So
Okay.
so 9/11 happens. We're in Iraq, we're in Afghanistan. A lot of my classmates around 2004, 2005, family members are over in Iraq and Afghanistan. Around this time, around 2004, 2005, the people start to get a sense that maybe these wars aren't worth fighting, and maybe we got suckered into these wars for no good reason. Maybe, just maybe, we were lied to. That starts coming out a little bit, because after the attack, the majority of the people were gung ho. They wanted to go into Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And Iraq was a little bit more of a harder sell, but as you know, Colin Powell did
Yep.
a magic trick over there at the UN, and was able to get us into Iraq. But around 2005, 2006, the wool starts coming down, and people start to see actually what's really going on. And without any room to breathe, the collapse, the housing crisis happens. Now, if you can you explain the housing crisis for the layman?
Smarter people than me have tried to do that. So let's kind of wade into it here. Um, it happened because everybody was pushing the idea that every American should be able to afford a home.
Right.
So it started with all good intentions, as most evil things do, and they were finding houses. I know that the labor movement here in LA were all gung ho. They were putting public relation releases out, saying that so many people are now owning homes, and I saw these homes going up in my neighborhood, and there where I lived was like a $200,000 home, and that was pretty nice. But the ones across the street, the ones that were being paid for in 2008, were 750,000. I said, how can these people afford to live in these houses? And in a lot of cases, they were just waiting for the hammer to drop before they had to move on. But in a lot of cases, they thought because of the picture that was painted by the realtor or the bank that yeah, we can afford this because our wages are going to rise also. So eventually, it's going to come to the point where it's really affordable for us, or even cheap. And those days didn't come, did they?
Absolutely not.
So people started losing their homes left and right, and it probably soured a lot of your generation on ever going. You probably wondered if you're ever going to be able to afford a home.
Right, right, and that's the that's the crux of the issue. Like a lot of a lot of my audience are about 30 somethings. They're about my age, and so when the financial when the housing crisis happened, I was actually working at a surveying company. I was about 18 years old, 19 years old. I was a computer drafter, and we would do land surveys for title companies, and around 2005 2006 it was booming, booming. We were getting hired to do survey after survey after survey because houses were being built. Contracting companies were, I mean, they were everywhere. You would see subdivisions being built everywhere, right? Because it was the standards for who can buy a home had dropped so low that anybody could buy a home, right?
It's true.
And so, right, and like you said, like the intentions of the government might have been good. I'm not really sold on that, but
Okay.
but I know Bush passed, what was it, the American Dream Act?
Yeah.
Which did exactly that. It lowered the standards of who can own a home. It lowered the down payment. In some cases, I believe that you didn't even have to have a down payment.
That's true.
You
Yeah.
you didn't even have to show proof of income in many cases. Anybody could buy a home.
Did you at any point in those years look over your shoulder like, how long can this last?
I mean, I wasn't thinking about it at that
Oh,
time.
I did. I went on NPR radio to the show called The Motley Fool, and
I've
I
heard of it. Yeah.
said, yeah, I said, when is this bubble going to burst? I said that in about 2007, and they had no answer. They thought that it was imminent too. So go figure.
Well, it's funny because there's a lot of people that saw it coming, and there's a lot of people that were whistling past the graveyard as well. And
Exactly. Yeah.
a lot of people in positions of power, in positions of influence. People saying that this can go on forever, baby.
Yeah.
Uh, and unfortunately, as we know, everything that comes up must come down. But especially with the games that the banks were playing on
Yeah.
the American people. There's this podcast hosted by a journalist named David Sirota. It's called Meltdown. It was exactly about the financial collapse, and some of the stories that came out about the tactics that banks would use on people, as I mean, APRs,
Yeah.
the interest rates that were adjustable, that would get people in the door, right?
Yeah.
you know uh, and 6 months later, the interest rate would jump up to something that was unmanageable, right?
Mhm.
And people would get screwed out of a home. My best friend's family got screwed out of a home that way, you know um
Yes.
and my mentality at that time was, well, you should have known what you were getting yourself into, right? Or you should have. I was very libertarian in my thinking, right? Nobody put a gun to your head and told you to sign that contract, did they? And I mean, well, that. What an argument, right? I mean, if like, do you remember that building in Florida that collapsed
Yeah.
recently? It was like a hotel, right?
Yes, it
That
was.
collapsed. I heard a libertarian making an argument. Well, people should have known whether the inspections were up to date or not. I'm thinking to myself, dude, are you out of your fucking mind?
Yeah, I just drove by an area that what used to be known as a flood zone, and they're building houses left and right, right in that area. So uh, you got to wonder. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but you see, but a lot of this libertarian mindset, and at the time, was it Alan Greenspan was on the
Right.
Fed, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
Before that, and this guy was an apostle of Ayn Rand, who's the queen of laissez-faire capitalism, and so, I mean, these ideologies, permeate through our government, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, after Bill Clinton, like you mentioned earlier, there was very little difference between Republican and Democrat as far as the government's relationship to corporations, and and the free wielding ability of corporations to basically get away with anything. And so we come full circle to what that's given us today is the fact that there really is no difference between the Democrat Party and the Republican Party. They fight over social issues and the culture war reigns, and at the end of the day, they're all beholden to the same dark money interests and the same lobbyists and the same corporations.
Do me a favor, call it the Democratic Party.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
And it's just. I mean, I'm getting off on a tangent
No,
here.
I understand what you're saying. You're saying it's getting to be really hard to tell the difference between the parties, but that's not true.
Well, I mean,
to a certain extent, within the Democratic Party, the reason why we haven't been able to take advantage of the splintering of the Republican Party is because we got our own little inner fighting going on. There's the neoliberals like Bill Clinton who said you have to match the Republicans dollar for dollar on elections. And how are you going to get those dollars? Oil, tobacco, big pharma. That's where all that money's coming from. And then there's the ideologues within the Democratic Party called the progressives. And I happen to be one of them. And the progressives say, you can't take their money and still say that you're for the little guy, because that's talking out of both sides of your mouth. So what we're trying to do is keep the party honest, while at the same time trying to find a way to create public financing of elections. That's been talked about for decades, and we should be able to get to that.
But how honest is it being kept when you got President Joe Manchin completely derailing the Biden agenda? I mean,
I agree.
The Democratic Party is completely beholden to people like Kirsten Sinema, Joe Manchin. Without them, the entire Biden agenda is completely derailed. I mean, Joe Manchin is a coal baron.
I don't know. The Democratic Party is not as good at whipping people into shape as the Republican Party.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
Because we're the party with the big tent. We take everybody in our party, and we don't discriminate. So, but to tell you the truth, I think that he's been able to get things passed that a lot of people didn't think was possible. Maybe watered down quite a bit, but he has get
very watered down. Yeah.
Today, jobless claims came out, and it's at a 52-year low for unemployment. 52 years.
Well, that is good news. I don't know if you also saw, but the last couple of months, the jobs reports that were coming in were a little disappointing, right?
Yeah.
There was a report that wasn't really covered in the media that those numbers were off. Those numbers were off, and that the report for the job numbers were actually better than expected. That they were actually better than expected because the surveys that are sent out to businesses, right, weren't getting returned by companies that were experiencing high stress levels. In other words, the companies that were more likely to be hiring, right? And so the companies that were experiencing less stress levels were the ones that were sending these surveys back. But when these surveys came back, they were able to redo the numbers, and they realized that actually, they are keeping up with their employment goals. But I didn't see that anywhere in the media.
Yeah, I know. Everything is put into terms of a race or something, or they like playing both sides against each other because that makes for dramatic TV and radio. So we've seen a lot of it in our lifetimes. And
yeah, I know that. See, and I'd like to ask you about that, about the but we'll get to it, about the woke part of the Democratic Party and the the not so woke part of it, and the battle that's going on there, and whether you think it's good or not. But let's we'll reach the current area. Let's get through the financial
Right.
collapse of 2008. So people start losing their homes when the bubble burst, and uh, Barack Obama is elected in 2008 with a promise to bail people out directly for to help them save their homes. So TARP passes, and a lot of fuckery starts happening behind the scenes, right? uh Timothy Geithner is gets voted into to
Day
to what
to save the day.
to save the day, and basically take charge of the TARP program.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure you know about Timothy Geithner. This
Oh
guy
yeah.
is this
Yeah.
guy is the son of Wall Street, right? Uh, and so behind the scenes, as people are losing their homes, news comes out that these banking companies and these insurance companies, AIG, that they're giving their CEOs bonuses with taxpayer money
Yep.
as people are losing their homes. And what do you think that does to the national psyche?
And there's another low point in our many low points over the last 200 years. I was aghast that he would bring in people like Geithner because it was letting the fox into the hen house.
Yeah.
And yeah, that nobody needed to be any kind of pundit to know that was a bad idea.
Yeah, and so then Obama gets there. He was having a town hall meeting, and he gets questioned about this, about the lack of transparency.
Yeah.
I forget who the questioner was, but it was a member of the audience, and he basically, he kind of dropped the ball on how to answer, and he basically says, "I'll get back to you on that." You know, the question was, you promised us that you were gonna be transparent in how the TARP program is being handled, and yeah, we know. I'll get back to you. I think we've been more transparent than the other guys, but I'll get back to you. And so then he makes a speech following that where he's saying, okay, so look, here's here's what we're gonna do. We're going to bail out the people directly so that you can stay in your homes. And that was a high point. But then as the months passed, there was more fuckery happening behind the scenes, and it turned out that the TARP bill actually gave the Secretary of the Treasury full control on how the money gets spent. And he changed the rules behind the scenes completely, to the point where even Congress, where even people from the House and the Senate were pissed off about it because they felt like the rug had been pulled out from
Sure.
underneath
They
them.
voted for one thing.
Right.
Something else was doing.
And so the money went straight to the banks. And so Obama makes a speech after this where he's saying that the instead of bailing out the banks, they're going to bail out the people. Immediately on, I think it was on CNBC, there was a speech that started the Tea Party movement. It was by, what is his name? And it happened on the Wall Street floor, and he was saying, Obama, are you hearing us? We're not here to bail out these losers. What was his name? Do you remember that speech?
Somewhat, but I don't remember who it was either.
Was it Rick? I don't.
Santorum?
No, it wasn't Santorum. It was he was a pundit, but he was a Wall Street pundit, and he's sitting down at Wall Street with a bunch of bankers behind him, and he's making the speech against communism and how Obama is Rick Santelli.
Oh, okay.
Rick Santelli, and that was the initials, beginnings of the Tea Party movement, right? And Glenn Beck jumped on it. And then this whole Tea Party movement began. And I was huge at the time on the Tea Party. I thought it was the greatest thing since the real Tea Party. I thought this was the real what America needed. Small government at the time when we actually needed government to step in. That was the insidious thing about the propaganda that was coming out of the Glenn Becks and out of Wall Street, was that at the time that we actually needed the regulation and needed the government, it got framed in such a way to where any government intervention was coming against your freedom.
Yeah.
And of
Somebody
course,
said they wanted to strangle it in the bathtub or something like that.
yeah, I forget who that was, but I did hear about that.
Yeah.
But then this Tea Party, revolution happens, right? With a bunch of people fighting against they don't even know what, right? There was this one sign where this lady was holding up a placard that said, "Get your government hands off my Medicare."
Somebody unclear on the concept. Okay.
Exactly. But it was all based on emotion. It was
Sure.
all based on emotion. They were angry about something, but they didn't know what.
I think you found the origins of Trump there.
Exactly. Exactly. They were angry about something, but they didn't know what they were angry about. So they needed the help of these charlatans to kind of guide them in the right direction, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously, it was the wrong direction, right? Because how can you have we get to Trump and suddenly you have this guy that's talking for the little person, but doing the bidding of the corporations.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting the way things played out, and the kind of people that were able to take advantage of a crisis for their own political gain,
Exactly.
right? So okay, so then we have an angry populace, right? They don't trust the old neoliberal order anymore, right? They know that the system failed them. They know that they got screwed over. 401ks were wiped out. People committed suicide. The gig economy was born. People were barely making ends meet. Housing, was off the table for a lot of people my age. Wages were at an all-time low. But people were hurting, and the rich were getting richer. Not only were they getting richer, they were blatantly getting richer, and they were waving it in your face with your own tax money. God, what an ugly feeling. I'm getting angry just thinking about it.
Hang
I'm
on
getting
to
angry.
that. Use it for good.
Yeah, 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 no, no. And so then we get Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump in 2016.
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton, the representation of everything I just mentioned,
Yes.
versus this charlatan who was able to position himself as the champion of the working class.
Yeah, that's why I was for Bernie. I had met Hillary back in '92, right before Bill got the nod to be our presidential candidate, and she seemed really sharp to me, very very intelligent woman. What the problem was back when she was first lady and trying to get us health care, the Republicans made up all sorts of lies and things like that
Mhm.
about her, and she never ever refuted them. She probably thought, well, my actions speak louder than
Mhm.
words, but she really should have said, these things you're saying aren't true. They're lies. And she didn't do that. So your generation came up believing all this stuff because nobody was saying that it's not true. And so when it came election time, you didn't want to vote for her. I
Yeah.
didn't want to vote for her because of all the other things that you mentioned, because she came on that neoliberal thing. And I really didn't know how much of an influence her husband would have on her. I saw how much influence he had on Obama. So, and that's where Obama went wrong. He tried to do the same thing as Bill and try to take the Republican agenda for his own, but they wouldn't have a black guy take their agenda.
Right.
They couldn't see that happen. So along comes and Hillary played all sorts of tricks to wipe out Bernie, so he wasn't considered, even though he was drawing stadiums full of people. And
Yeah.
he had these great ideas that weren't radical. They were ideas that harken back to FDR, tuition-free college. People just called it free college, which, was said with a sneer usually, because they said there's no way you can afford it. By the way, our community colleges here in California are once again free. But in the meantime,
Mm.
he got wiped out, and so you had the lesser of two evils, so to speak. And I still don't know what happened, but from what I understand, there was maybe a little bit of collusion with the Russians that helped push the election in a certain direction.
I mean, I don't buy that last bit. I just think it was a failure of politics when it came to Hillary Clinton. She didn't campaign along the Rust Belt. She took things for granted. She actually wanted Trump to be the one that she ran against.
Yeah,
Um, she was living in a bubble. She was living in a bubble, and
yeah,
she thought that that it was hers. She thought that it was hers, and she got caught with the guard down. She put her guard down, and Trump took it.
yeah.
I,
She
I
was
I
in
I don't
West
think she
Virginia.
realized how unpopular she was.
I know. She was in West Virginia talking to miners, and she said, "Get used to the fact that you're going to have to find another job."
Yeah, what a message, huh?
Yeah,
Yeah, what a message. And you contrast that with what Trump was saying at the time. We're bringing back manufacturing and we're bringing back this. And anything for a soundbite. This guy.
yeah, yeah.
Because as we now know, manufacturings were at a net loss under Donald Trump, during his presidency. Um, but yeah, okay. So we're at 2016. Donald Trump wins the presidency, right? And so there is a quite a bit of there's a sleight of hand that he's able to pull on the American people. He inherits an economy that's on the rebound. Right, he inherits an economy that is, by all measures, current measures that we use, the stock market, GDP, unemployment. I don't think those are accurate measures to measure the health of the average American person, but that's what
No,
we're given.
exactly.
Right, but by every standard measure that we use, he inherits a booming economy. So
Yep.
he's able to manipulate the data and convince people that all of that is because of him.
Yes.
That that because of him we became gas independent, oil independent. Not knowing that all the groundwork had already been laid, and that the stock markets was already hitting records. As a matter of fact, if you were to look at Obama's, I think, last three or last term in office, he created more net jobs than Trump did in his 4 years. If you don't even include the COVID pandemic.
Right.
Uh, and so, but he's able to convince people that he's the economic dream, that he's working for the working person. But all that does not happen unless people are willing to hear it out. Unless people are just aching for something different, and that aching for something different. What is that? What is going on in the minds and the hearts of the American people that they're willing to take a chance? And even in 2024, the Republican Party has not abandoned Trump at all.
I
even
know.
after even after the Stop the Steal, anti-democracy, anti-constitution movement, and the Republicans are the ones that claim that they're the champions of the Constitution, and yada yada yada. It's all lip service. We know that. But what is it that's happening in America that people are so desperate that they're willing to give this guy another crack at it?
One, he is a successful businessman, and he's never held office. I heard somebody say that, well, that's great. I'm going to have my mechanic do my teeth next time I go to the dentist. Um, but one of the things is this whole tough guy image, because that's why we got Reagan, and that's why we got Schwarzenegger here in California, and now this guy, because they all had this tough guy TV image, and people bought into it, and they thought, yeah, this is the guy I want running my country.
You're right.
So it's a celebrity thing, tough celebrity.
Yeah, did you see that scene where they're I think it's a G8 summit, or was it G7 now, where he's trailing behind the group of leaders, and he tries to work his way up to the front. He pushing all these leaders aside just to kind of reorganizes his coat just to get like this. That's how this guy is, huh? Just a photo op.
Yep. Also saw him squeeze an arm of a biker. Like, oh, you're my boyfriend.
Jeez. It's I don't think I've ever seen anything like it.
I couldn't understand why people didn't see through him, and but yet a third of the country still thinks he's something great.
I mean, a third of the country still thinks he's going to get reinstated.
I know, pretty scary, huh?
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I'm talking about. Is like that's not born out of. If things were great, let's say if people were happy, Donald Trump never gets elected. If the system was working, if the system was working, and if people were getting educated, if people were healthy because we have a good healthcare system, people have good jobs, good paying jobs with pensions, people could raise a family on a single job. If we had all of that, Donald Trump never gets elected.
Right.
Because his message was economic. And his message was a good one. It was a good one because you had so much crossover between Bernie supporters and Trump supporters. Yeah. Right? Because I mean, people did feel like they were screwed over. They did see their towns gutted out. They did see their manufacturing base ship overseas.
And we wanted somebody bold.
Yes. Yeah. And instead what we got is just an egomaniac who just talked a lot of shit and gave tax cuts to the rich.
That's right.
And and played the culture war.
Yes, that's very true. And that's why I adopted this thing that I'm calling facetiously the Mccrory Memo, because if we started taking back those conversations and realized and had think tanks and all that, I mean, we got the Economic Policy Institute and a couple of others. But what we need is to get into our schools and talk to people about unionism and labor. And that's why I love your generation, because you guys get it. There's a lot of, as you used the word before, awoke individuals now who realize that for you to have any kind of stability in your life, in order to be able to raise a family and have that house that you're talking about, you have to look at the idea that maybe the labor movement is going to give you a large voice to accomplish these things. Right. And they're doing it in droves now. There's all sorts of union movements going on. I think they called October Striketober.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you get strikes happening at John Deere.
Yep.
And a whole lot of other places, and the companies are giving in.
Yes. Yeah.
So right now, so Trump gets like the pandemic happens, and and the government is trying like crazy to get people back to work, but people just aren't having it.
Yeah, they call it. Anthony Klotz from Texas A&M said at first they called it pandemic epiphany, pandemic epiphanies. He was talking about because a lot of people realize that if I'm going to go back to this job and it was so insecure, I need to start thinking up, and they're going for bigger and better jobs that may be just as insecure, because a lot of companies went under. Right. One of my favorite electronics stores, Fry's, went under, and that surprised the hell out of me because I thought they were doing great. And you see that, like earthquake country here in LA, you realize that the ground's not that firm underneath you. So what do? You try to find something that if you're going to go through those kinds of um, turmoil, you might as well do it in a place that pays a little better.
Right, yeah. And so yeah, that's exactly the point, is that, during the pandemic, people were able to save money because, restaurants weren't open, and they weren't going out spending, on restaurants, and a lot of stores were closed, so they were able to pad themselves up a little bit to now be able to hold out for a better job,
Yep.
or to better renegotiate better pay. And I have friends that are running as Republicans that, portray themselves as, the fighters of the working class, who are criticizing people as lazy, and castigating them for being on unemployment a little bit longer, and not understanding the reasons why this is happening. People are sick and tired of busting their ass working for 7.25, 8, $9 an hour.
Thank you.
You know, you want people to get back to work? Give them a wage that's going to give them some dignity.
Yeah.
Provide them, some benefits that's going to make it worth it. Because there's a lot of people that put up with a lot of shit through the pandemic, and that that they weren't able to be there with their family, with their kids. A lot of women just decided to stay home and said, I don't got to put up with a 7.25 an hour job with a bullshit boss when I can be with my kid.
Yeah.
And I mean, just people basically, long story short, started rethinking life and rethinking their relationship to their employer and to their employment, and started recalculating the importance, what things they valued more, right? And
Yeah.
a lot of people don't like that, but more importantly, the oligarchs don't like that. The people with the money
Right.
don't like that, because they want to pay for, they don't want to pay for their labor. They like getting away with cheap labor,
Yes,
and for a long time they did.
they did.
And I see this as an opportunity to be able to change that dynamic at least a little bit.
Yeah, I want to do what I can as an individual, as somebody from the labor movement, to encourage all those folks that are trying to rebuild and rebuild better. If you'll pardon the phrase.
So
It's not just about the infrastructure; it's about lives too, though.
right. So
Yeah.
what's the Mccrory prescription? Let's say, if you have influence over the appropriate channels in government, what policies are you pushing at this point?
I would like to go back to what FDR did. He he had this little emblem that the shops put in their window when they had a good relationship with their workers, and so he recommended and told the public, you got to shop at this business because they treat their workers right.
Mm.
And that's one of the things that we could do to start this whole conversation. And again, like I said, the Mccrory Manifesto, it's all written up. It's going to schools and saying, this guy is a union guy. This is what he does for a living, and this is the kind of money he can make because he is a union guy. And if we can get that conversation back, I'm not so sure that the way unions used to be are going to be able to make that transition. I think you're going to see unions change in the way they do business also. You're not going to see those guys with cigars in the back room. You're going to see young people coming up and rising up, because it has a movement like that has to come from the bottom up,
Right.
in order to have any kind of sincere and effort to accomplish these things. But that's what I would do. I would take back the conversation and make laws that are passed in Congress and the Senate having to do with working people instead of in the favor of corporations and the wealthy.
Yeah, so so Joe Biden fancies himself the greatest union president. What grade do you give him on that?
I'd say C.
A C? Explain that.
A C because he's making an effort. He is talking to the right people. I'm actually pleased with the new head of the AFL-CIO. A woman, for the first time ever, is the head of the AFL-CIO, and she's in the news every single day, talking up unions and talking to working people. And God bless her. I think that she will keep him on the right path, because the whole globe actually at this point is renegotiating, rebuilding, rethinking everything, and it's not just happening here. That we're seeing the big quit, or what's the other name for it? The Great Resignation.
The Great Resignation, yeah.
We're seeing that across the world, and I'm enthused and encouraged by that, and I will do anything I can to support that kind of behavior, because we have to take stock in ourselves. We have to realize that we're the ones running this country. The rich and the corporations, they don't pay taxes. The poor don't pay taxes. Everything falls on our backs. So it should be looking out for our best interests.
Right, right. And so the Democratic Party, as it stands right now, is in a bit of its own kind of tussle, of its own battle, between the old neoliberal order and between the progressive wing, started by Bernie Sanders.
Exactly.
How plagued, though, is this new progressive wing by this perception of wokeness, about the way that they speak, the way that they go after, the white man. It's I mean, as far as politics goes, how smart is that? As a strategy, when you need people to vote for you, the largest voting base in America, you're going to antagonize. It doesn't seem very smart. What ways can maybe that they can retool their strategy to be able to appeal to a broader base?
Actually, we have a progressive caucus of the Democratic State Party, and I ran for vice president for that. I was unsuccessful because they had the vote stack already. But one of the things I was talking about was to be insidious and move into all the other caucuses, so that you have a progressive base in all the caucuses, and then you can work together to accomplish something. But instead, they've kind of been over here yelling and screaming and getting put down left and right because of the fact that they're not garnering the support from other organizations that they need to have that voice.
Right.
And here in California, the head of the Democratic Party is a guy named Rusty Hicks. He came from the labor movement. Well, you can't really say he came from the labor movement, but he's got some background in the labor movement. And they installed him to keep the status quo. And so far, he's done an effective job of that, because the guy, Amar Singh, who's in charge of the Progressive Caucus, wants to run his own show, and he doesn't want to share the limelight. So that's what you end up with is somebody crying outside the door saying, "Let me in, let me in." And we have to be smarter about this.
Yeah, and even just basic messaging,
Yes.
of how just the tone deafness on how it's going to be perceived by the American people. I'll give you an example: defund the police, right? No, I mean that's not going to work. Just as far as messaging, as far as the branding goes, that's not going to work. You can, and I've heard them explain it, but there's so many different ways you can recraft that message to not give that sour feeling in people.
Yes, I know. We're not good at messaging. Black Lives Matter should have said Black Lives Matter too. And that would have taken a lot of argument away from some people who thought they were just hoisting themselves up. And yeah, you're right. Our messaging is not good as Democrats. We're not known for our messaging. But you turn on every channel on Sunday morning or whatever, Meet the Press and all those, And if it's a Republican talking, every word is almost exactly the same. You won't hear that from the Democrats.
Oh yeah, yeah. Nobody beats the Republican machine at messaging and at branding, and you include that with the media apparatus. They're all in sync completely. They're all talking about CRT. They're all talking about Big Bird. They're all talking about Dr. Seuss. They're all in cahoots. They're all in the messaging is almost beautiful to see if it were used if it were used for the right cause, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, you
But
don't get that kind of sync by being nice to people. You get that by threats and saying, if you don't toe the line, we're going to find somebody to replace you next time you run for office.
yeah,
So
and
threats seem to work.
and there's one thing that I wish Biden had a little bit more of, was that kind of that negotiation minded, especially that negotiation mind, that tough guy kind of, the whole willing to put you on blast, like Joe Manchin, look, dude, I know you're doing some shady shit over there where you're at. Either you play ball here or we're coming after you. Either way, you want a military base over there where you're at, we'll give it to you. You want this, but you're gonna play ball. If not, we're coming after you. Christian Cinema, what happened to you? You were on our side at one point, and suddenly now you're taking these millions from these pharmaceutical lobbies, and now you're negotiating this down. That's not going to happen. Either you're going to play ball or we're going to put you on blast. Joe Biden just
Yeah,
doesn't seem to.
he's too amiable.
Yeah, he just doesn't have that. To accomplish big things, you need a big personality, and you need to you need to push your weight. And I just don't see him as the guy that's going to do that.
What did you think of Bernie?
I was never a fan of Bernie in the past, because I had been a Republican conservative for a very, very, very long time.
Okay.
Right after I voted for Trump in 2016, um, up till around about 2 years ago, I started to see the grift, and I started to see the just the bullshit artist that he was,
Yeah.
and the kind of the stage curtains just came down completely, and the way the Republican Party, the GOP, just slavishly, just ate everything that this guy said, just turned me off completely. I was turned off to everything that the principles that the GOP said that they stood for, how easily they were willing to break them over this guy. And yeah, nothing mattered, nothing. It was culture war 24/7. They didn't get shit done. The only piece of legislation they passed was tax cuts for the rich. That got me to rethink a whole lot of things, and I came down to, listen, if we're not fighting for working people, and if we're not passing policies and standing with labor unions, and if we're not actively working to help the middle class and to help the lower classes, then what is it that we stand for? What is it that I stand for?
Yeah.
I made arguments for the rich way too long. I argued for trickle down economics way too long. I read the Thomas Sowells, I read the Milton Friedmans. I was very well versed in Austrian economics and Austrian theory. But at the end of the day, I realized that the arguments I was making under the guise of freedom was only making one class in this country more free and enslaving the entire middle class and the entire the lower classes to these people. And so I definitely started to retool my thinking, and I realized that that Bernie Sanders, his policies were fighting for the middle class. They were fighting for the working man, and I came away with a little more respect for Bernie Sanders than I'd ever had before, because at least he had been consistent. At least his fights were the same day in and day out, and the attacks that I used to bite, the bait that they used to throw, this guy's a socialist and he owns two houses. It's intellectual fast food. At the end of the day, what policies are going to help people? And it completely shifted my paradigm in the way, in my ideology, in the way I think. I no longer consider myself a Republican. I don't consider myself a Democrat even. I'm more of an independent. I'm waiting on a candidate that's going to uh to shift the system away from the corporations, and and give power back to the laborers.
Well, that's quite a journey you made there.
It was quite a 180, wasn't
So what do you, I'm interviewing you.
it?
What do you say to the people that you left behind that are still stuck in that mentality?
That's a very interesting question, because I'm in daily combat with my father.
Uh,
I'm in daily combat with my, a lot of my close friends, a lot of my family members that were really bewitched by
mm,
Donald Trump. And
yeah, my
that's the
siblings too.
yeah, that's the word that came to mind, because I really don't know how else to explain it. There was a mixed there's a mixture of religion, and there's a mixture of culture war, and there's a mixture of, this guy was willing to fight for me. Nobody has no I was looking for an advocate, looking for a fighter, not so much as far as economics, but culturally. I was
Mm,
being culturally drowned out for a long time.
yeah,
I felt like my religion was being attacked, was being, moved out of the schools, and yada yada yada. And this guy came along. First thing, he moves, our embassy to Jerusalem. And in other words, things that won't make a lick of difference in your life. Nothing that's going to make your experience on this earth any more comfortable or any
right.
better. But it
The wall.
was, yeah, the wall. It was just these tokens of culture, and the just the lip service to evangelicalism, the lip service to the working man, and the lip service to minorities that never really panned out. But they bid it hook, line, and sinker,
Yep.
and they'll be loyal to him till the end. And that's
Yep.
the scary part, and that's what I'm trying to fight. And I've managed to persuade a few people in the, at least, to start thinking straight and get out of that almost cult like mentality, and to be able to see things as they are. I'm not saying they're going to vote for Bernie Sanders or Biden, or, I mean, I wouldn't even suggest it,
Yeah.
but know why you're voting for somebody, and
Yeah.
know when you're getting bullshitted, and know when somebody's trying to sell you something. And for God's sakes, man, don't vote for somebody that just literally just tried to steal a freaking election, and was willing to throw his vice president under the bus to do it.
Yep.
I mean, you've lost me completely when you're okay with, you lost me completely when you're okay with that. Don't talk to me about how much you love the country. Don't talk to me about how much you love the Constitution and freedom when you were okay with, when you co-signed on Donald Trump trying to steal the election. Swerve at me with that stuff, man, because I'm not listening to it. I don't have time for it, and uh, and it sucks, because these are the kind of conversations that need to be had.
Yes. And I'm not afraid to have them. I've engaged with people, well, for a while there, almost daily on Facebook.
Right?
And I knew the person I was talking to on the other end, I was not going to convince him, but I was hoping somebody else was tuning in that was
Exactly.
right in the fence, and would suddenly say, "What was I thinking?" And you probably
Exactly.
do this podcast for the same reason.
Yes, exactly. And I try to bring on a lot of Trump supporters, because I know what they're going to say before they even say it, number one. And so, I can present a different perspective. I try to be respectful, but sometimes it gets a little heated, especially when we talk about, fraud and for this election being stolen. I really have very little patience for that.
Yeah,
Um,
when I show this book to people, I can tell by their reaction to the title whether or not they're Republican or Democrat.
Of course, of course. And and that's it doesn't have to be that way because things shouldn't be black and white. And
Exactly. They're
it's like
not.
this. Yeah, exactly. And it's like this issue, because I had a professor of political economy, my sophomore year in college. His name was Professor Freeman. At that time, I was a diehard conservative, man. I was Rush Limbaugh out. I was, man, listening to Hannity and Beck and O'Reilly, and I was just propagandized, dude, from morning to afternoon. I knew my talking points. I knew what I was gonna say. But then I went into this professor's class, and slowly he showed me things that got me to think a little bit. That started the process a little bit right there. That he showed me things like, and he didn't do it in a way to like insult me. He didn't do it in a way to make me feel like I was dumb or like I didn't know what I was talking about. He just showed me. Let me put this in your pipe and smoke it and see what that does for you, right? And then I on my own started thinking about it the issue I realized was not that that I was brainwashed or anything like that. It was just that I was taught to think that there was only one right answer, and my team had it.
Huh.
You know,
Interesting.
yeah, there was only one right answer. My team had it. We had a monopoly on the truth. We had a monopoly on facts, and anybody who disagreed had to be either evil or had to, be some kind of communist and or some kind of, like you said, the journey was interesting because it was about a 10-year one, where we're slowly, I started to just rethink old tribal affinities.
Sure.
But
Congratulations.
nonetheless, what's that?
Congratulations. Because
Yeah.
that's the brain up there.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's something up there, and it seems to be working. So, I mean, we're off to a good start.
Yeah.
But let's end up on uh on a real quick compendulum on capitalism and whether you think it can be saved or whether you think it even deserves to be saved.
Um, that's a good question because I don't think that we should seize the means of production like some people would say. There's different forms of socialism. I'm a democratic socialist in that I believe that we need robust oversight of our corporations so they don't get away with stuff
Right.
because you can't have with them watching each other. That's ridiculous.
Right.
But I think that we have to get used to the fact that we're running out of resources. We need to. There's a whole movement out there. They're called something something growth economy, and what they're looking at is we're running out of resources, and the theory that capitalism is all about growth is not going to work anymore. We need to make things more sustainable. Instead of worrying about growing our businesses, we should think about things like feeding the world. We could do so much on this planet if we would retool the way that we think about capitalism or think about any kind of economic system, because we now have the capacity to feed everybody on the planet. And why aren't we doing it?
That's a very good
There,
question.
I mean, there's so many things that we can. The Green New Deal. What I like about it is it's going to create jobs out of jobs that are no longer needed. Those coal miners in West Virginia can now build solar panels and things like that because that's a sustainable type of energy that we could really use.
Right.
There's so many great ideas that are coming out there on a day-to-day basis. And in my book, I even say my last chapter is called Evolution or Revolution, and we determine whether that which is going to happen. But the evolution is happening because we're finding all sorts of really smart people with great ideas that we should take advantage of. And again, I'm encouraged and heartened by the fact that your generation is taking the bull by the horns and trying to accomplish something. And I support you 100%.
Well, I appreciate that. And Dan Mccrory, I think on that note, we'll call it a podcast. What do you think? Any final thoughts on anything that we talked about?
Well, there's all sorts of things that we didn't cover in the book. So if people, tell you what, how many listeners do you have? Do you have a lot of listeners?
I have a whole lot of listeners.
Do you think one of them would like to win a copy of my book?
I'm pretty sure they'd be excited about that.
Okay, well then you let me know who it was, and I'll send that book to them.
Okay, I'll send you the information, and we can get that done.
Yeah, we're talking about my other book because it's a novel and it talks about a guy who's got Parkinson's disease and what's happening with him. He has cheated on his wife and he's ignored his friends. So when he tells everybody, "I've got Parkinson's, I'm dying," they say, "So what?"
That's quite the swan song, huh?
Yeah, it's called "You Will Forever Be My Always," and it came out yesterday.
It sounds really sad.
Actually, it's got a lot of humor in it. It'll surprise a lot of people.
Some dark humor?
What's that?
Is it some dark humor?
Yeah, some of that, but silly stuff too. And he goes to he wants to save his mortal soul. So he goes to Thailand and talks to a Catholic priest and a Buddhist priest. Then he goes to Morocco and talks to Jews and Muslims. And then he comes home and decides the best thing he can do is go through Texas, where I grew up, and try to make it up to all the people that he screwed over the years.
Wow. And so You Will Forever Be My Always.
Yes.
And that got released yesterday.
Yes.
And where can people find that?
Barnes & Noble, Amazon, the usual places.
Okay. So You Will Forever Be My Always, Dan Mccrory. Yep. And How Capitalism Killed the Middle Class.
You got the how. I deliberately made it look like a murder mystery. Capitalism killed the middle class.
I saw
25 ways the system is rigged against you.
Yes, that's clever. Well, maybe we can do a round 2 here pretty soon, and just specifically talk about the book.
I'm actually coming out with a sequel too. So
I saw that in another podcast you did where you talk about other countries.
Yes, that's
right.
The global edition.
The global edition. That's right. Well, looking forward to it.
Me too.
Rory, you enjoy your Thanksgiving. It was a real pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, same here, Rolly.
I learned a lot, and I think the conversation was a good one. And we'll definitely do this again soon. Okay.
Okay, I learned some things too.
All right, Dan. Well, take care of yourself. Okay.
You too. Bye.
All right, buddy. Good night.